Evelyn Whitmore had lived most of her life inside walls of marble and glass. Her late husband had left her with more wealth than she could ever spend, yet the house itself felt colder with each passing year. It was not just the silence of absence that weighed on her. It was the way the chandeliers hung heavy with dust, the way the gardens had grown wild, and the way the paint on the window frames had begun to peel, as if time itself had forgotten to show her mercy. For months, she ignored the disrepair, but one spring morning, standing at the bottom of the sweeping staircase, Evelyn realized the house mirrored her own heart, elegant on the surface, but quietly crumbling within. That was when she decided she needed someone to bring it back to life. The agency sent her a man named Noah Mercer, a handyman with calloused hands and eyes that held the quiet weight of someone who knew the value of honest work. He arrived with nothing more than a sturdy toolbox and a nod of respect, his boots echoing against the marble floor as he stepped inside. Evelyn studied him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. She had expected someone rough around the edges, perhaps careless. Instead, Noah carried himself with calm precision, like a craftsman who respected not just wood and stone, but the stories they carried. "I'll start with the windows," he said simply, his voice steady. Evelyn nodded, though a part of her wondered what she had really invited into her life. Because as Noah walked through the house, sunlight chasing his steps, something shifted ever so slightly in the air, as if the mansion, long dormant, had begun to breathe again. The following days unfolded with the rhythm of hammering, sanding, and the quiet hum of Noah's presence moving through the mansion. Evelyn found herself drawn to the sound, as if every strike of his tools chipped away not only at the wear of the house, but also at the heaviness she carried inside. Each morning, she watched from the upper landing as Noah arrived. His truck would crunch over the gravel driveway, a modest vehicle parked against the backdrop of towering columns and carved stone lions that guarded the estate. He would step out, wipe his hands on his jeans, and lift his toolbox with an ease that spoke of years spent working without complaint. One afternoon, Evelyn ventured into the music room where Noah was repairing a cracked window frame. The air carried the faint smell of sawdust, blending with the scent of old sheet music that still rested on the grand piano. She lingered near the doorway, her hand brushing the frame of a portrait of her late husband. His painted eyes seemed to follow her, a reminder of promises made and a love that once filled the house with laughter. "You've kept everything," Noah said quietly, noticing the rows of untouched instruments, the draped chairs, the heavy curtains. His voice was not intrusive, more an observation spoken with gentle respect. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "It's hard to let go." Noah looked at her briefly, then returned to his work. "Sometimes fixing what remains doesn't mean erasing what was," he said, adjusting the wood with careful precision. The words lingered in the room long after he had spoken them. Evelyn found herself unsettled, not because he was wrong, but because for the first time in years, someone had reminded her that restoration was not just about walls and windows, it was about hearts as well. The garden had always been Evelyn's sanctuary in her youth. Roses once bloomed in cascades of color, and marble fountains sang under the sun. But years of neglect had turned it into a tangled maze of thorns and shadows. Weeds coiled around broken statues, and dry leaves carpeted the paths that once guided guests through beauty. Evelyn rarely stepped outside anymore. It was too painful to witness what time had stolen. One morning, she noticed Noah walking toward the garden with gloves in hand and determination in his stride. He had not been asked to tend it, yet there he was, bending to pull the stubborn roots that clung to the earth, clearing away the decay with patience. Evelyn followed quietly, pausing near the veranda, watching as he worked. His movements were deliberate, respectful, as though each vine he removed revealed something sacred beneath. She descended the stone steps and approached, her voice hesitant. "That part of the estate is Forgotten. It's too much work for one person. Noah straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Forgotten doesn't mean lost, he replied. It just needs someone willing to give it time. Evelyn's chest tightened at his words. She realized he was not speaking only of the garden. The way he looked at the grounds, seeing possibility instead of ruin, stirred something fragile in her. For the first time in years, she felt the faint pulse of hope. Over the next days, she joined him. At first, she carried a small basket, trimming only what her hands could manage. Slowly together, they uncovered patches of soil where sunlight touched tender shoots. Flowers, long buried beneath weeds, struggled upward, resilient in their fight to bloom again. Standing side by side, Evelyn and Noah watched as color began to return to the estate. And in the quiet between them, Evelyn sensed that what was reviving outside was also awakening within her heart. The house had begun to sound different. Where once silence reigned, there were now the gentle echoes of life, footsteps crossing the marble, the scrape of wood being smoothed, and occasionally the low hum of Noah whistling while he worked. Evelyn, who had grown used to filling her days with hollow quiet, found herself waiting for those sounds. They were proof that the mansion, like herself, was no longer entirely alone. One evening, as the sun set and cast golden light across the long hallway, Evelyn carried a tray of tea into the library. Noah was there, repairing the shelves that had sagged under the weight of generations of books. The scent of leather and dust filled the air, mingling with the sharper tang of varnish. She set the tray down, feeling oddly nervous, as if offering tea was a gesture too intimate for someone who was supposed to be just an employee. Noah glanced up, his hands steady on the wood. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," he said with a nod, his tone respectful. "Evelyn," she corrected gently. It had been years since anyone had spoken her name without formality, and hearing it aloud felt strangely tender. He paused, then gave a faint smile. "Evelyn." They sipped tea in the hush of the library, the crackle of the fire filling the spaces between words. At first, they spoke only of the house, what needed mending, what could be restored. But slowly, the conversation shifted. She asked about his past, and he shared pieces of it, never boasting, never dramatic, just fragments of a life built through resilience, a childhood marked by scarcity, years of moving from place to place, learning to repair things because nothing could be wasted. Evelyn listened closely, realizing his story was not about loss, but about endurance. And as he spoke, she wondered if this quiet man was teaching her more than he realized, that healing did not arrive all at once, but through small, steady acts of care. A week later, the skies opened with a fury. Heavy rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled across the valley like an ancient drum. Evelyn stood by the parlor window, watching rivulets of water race down the glass. She had always hated storms. They reminded her of nights spent alone after her husband's passing, when the mansion seemed less a home and more a hollow fortress, echoing her grief. That evening, Noah remained in the house, repairing a loose section of the roof that had threatened to give way. When he finally came inside, his jacket was soaked through and his hair clung to his forehead. Evelyn, almost without thinking, hurried toward him with a towel. For a brief moment, their hands brushed as she offered it, a simple touch that startled them both with its quiet warmth. "You shouldn't be up there in weather like this," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. He gave a small shrug. "Better I do it now than let the storm make it worse. Besides," he added with calm certainty, "I've been through worse storms." Something in his tone carried weight beyond the weather. Evelyn studied him, realizing he wasn't speaking only of rain and wind. He was a man who had weathered tempests of his own and still stood steady, unshaken. The storm raged outside, but inside, the fire burned steadily in the hearth. Evelyn found herself sitting with Noah by its glow, listening as the wind howled against the windows. Yet for the first time in many years, she did not feel afraid. The house no longer seemed to echo emptiness. It resonated with presence. As lightning lit the room, Evelyn glanced at Noah. In that flickering moment, she saw not just a handyman, but a man whose quiet strength had begun to stitch her fractured world back together. The storm had passed, leaving the mansion damp with the scent of rain-soaked earth and wood. In the calm that followed, Noah turned his attention to a part of the house Evelyn rarely visited, the east wing. Dust lay thick on the floorboards, and cobwebs veiled the tall windows, muting the light. It was a part of the estate that time had almost erased, a corridor of forgotten rooms sealed away after her husband's death. Evelyn hesitated at the threshold as Noah pushed open a door that creaked like an old memory. Inside, the room was filled with covered furniture, portraits stacked against the wall, and boxes of belongings left untouched. She felt her throat tighten as her eyes lingered on a trunk marked with her husband's initials. For years, she had avoided this space, convinced that stepping inside would reopen wounds she had tried to bury. Noah set his tools aside, sensing her unease. "I can work here alone, if you'd rather," he said softly. His respect for her silence was more comforting than words of sympathy could ever be, but Evelyn surprised herself. "No," she murmured, "it's time." Together they uncovered the furniture. Dust rose into the air like ghosts stirred awake. Evelyn traced her hand along a piano bench where she once sat as a young bride, her husband beside her, their laughter echoing through the very walls. The memories stung, but beneath the pain was something else. A fragile reminder that love, though gone, had once been real and beautiful. Noah quietly repaired a broken frame, setting a portrait back into place. Watching him treat each forgotten object with care, Evelyn realized he was doing more than restoring wood and fabric. He was honoring her past while making room for her present. For the first time, Evelyn did not flee from her memories. Instead, standing in the forgotten wing with Noah beside her, she felt the weight of grief shift, lighter now, as if sorrow could coexist with the possibility of something new. It had been years since Evelyn had hosted a dinner in the grand dining hall. The long mahogany table, once set with crystal and silver, had remained bare, a silent monument to gatherings that would never return. But one evening, as the scent of roasted herbs drifted from the kitchen, Evelyn decided to break the silence. She prepared a modest meal, nothing compared to the lavish feasts of her past, yet it carried a sense of care she had not felt in a long time. When Noah finished repairing the last of the shutters, she appeared in the doorway, her hands folded with a hint of nervousness. "Stay for dinner," she said, the words almost foreign on her lips. Noah hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to such invitations, but something in her eyes, both vulnerable and resolute, convinced him. "All right," he replied. They sat opposite one another at the vast table, the space between them filled with flickering candlelight. At first, conversation clung to the familiar, the state of the roof, the progress in the garden, the stubborn crack in the library ceiling. But as the meal stretched on, the words softened. Evelyn shared a story from her youth about sneaking into the garden during summer nights with a book and a lantern. Noah listened intently, as if every detail mattered. In return, he spoke of learning carpentry from an old neighbor, a man who taught him that hands could be tools of both survival and creation. Laughter slipped between them, cautious at first, then more freely. The hall, once heavy with absence, rang with warmth it had not known in years. Evelyn noticed how the candlelight softened the lines on Noah's face, how his quiet strength carried an unexpected gentleness. By the time the plates were cleared, the silence between them was no longer hollow. It was full, charged with something neither dared name yet, but both undeniably felt. The following weekend, the air was crisp and clear, carrying the faint scent of pine from the distant hills. Evelyn suggested a walk through the estate grounds, something she had not done in years. The paths, though overgrown, still carried traces of their old elegance: crumbling stone benches, archways half hidden by ivy, and a fountain where water barely trickled anymore. Noah walked beside her, his pace unhurried, as though he knew the land deserved to be savoured. Evelyn found herself pointing out places tied to memory: the oak tree where her late husband once carved their initials, the secluded pond where summer lanterns reflected like stars on the water, the gazebo where music had once filled the air during parties. At first, her voice trembled with grief, but Noah listened without judgment, never rushing her. He did not try to comfort her with empty reassurances. Instead, he let her words rest where they belonged, allowing her past to be spoken aloud without shame or fear. When they reached the pond, Evelyn paused. The surface reflected her face, older now, touched by loss but not erased by it. She turned to Noah. "I sometimes wonder if I've been living more with ghosts than with life," she admitted, her honesty surprising even herself. Noah looked out at the still water. "Ghosts don't disappear," he said quietly, "but they don't have to keep you from moving forward either. Sometimes they walk with you, reminding you of where you've been, while you still choose where to go." The words struck deep. Evelyn realized that Noah was not trying to erase her history, but helping her carry it differently, less like a weight and more like a lantern lighting the path ahead. As they returned to the house, Evelyn noticed something she had not felt in years. Her steps were lighter, her heart steadier. Walking beside Noah, she no longer felt like a widow trapped in yesterday's silence, but a woman beginning to rediscover tomorrow. One evening, as twilight deepened and shadows stretched across the marble floors, Evelyn found herself drawn to the ballroom. It had been years since anyone stepped foot inside with purpose. The chandeliers hung dim with dust, and the polished floors bore the dullness of time. She pushed the heavy doors open, her breath catching as memories washed over her: music, laughter, the swirl of gowns, and her husband's hand guiding her through countless waltzes. Noah entered quietly, carrying a small lantern to inspect the cracked plaster along the ceiling. His light cast long shapes across the walls, and for a moment, Evelyn imagined the ghosts of her past dancing once again. She stood at the center of the room, uncertain, until Noah noticed her. "This place deserves life again," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "So did I once." Noah set the lantern down, dusted his hands, and offered one calloused palm toward her. Not with the elegance of a trained partner, but with the sincerity of someone willing to try. Evelyn hesitated, her heart pounding. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. There was no music, only the rhythm of their steps and the distant hum of night beyond the windows. At first, their movements were awkward, her grace dulled by years, his steps too practical for a dance floor. Yet, as they circled the empty ballroom, something shifted. She began to laugh softly at first, then freely, the sound echoing through the grand chamber like a forgotten melody. Noah chuckled too, his eyes meeting hers with warmth that needed no words. In that dim ballroom, they weren't widow and handyman or wealth and simplicity. They were two souls rediscovering what it meant to feel alive. As the lantern flickered, Evelyn realized the house was no longer haunted. It was beginning to sing again. The days stretched into weeks, and with each one, Evelyn noticed how the house no longer felt like a mausoleum. The air seemed lighter, the walls warmer, as if Noah's steady presence had driven away the silence that once pressed so heavily against her chest. She began to anticipate his footsteps in the hallways, the sound of tools clicking shut at the end of a long day, the quiet steadiness of his voice when he explained a repair. One afternoon she found herself in the library again, where sunlight streamed across the shelves like golden ribbons. Noah was perched on a ladder, carefully adjusting a section of molding. Evelyn lingered at the base, watching as he worked with precision. It struck her that he moved with a kind of reverence, not just for the wood and stone, but for the life they represented. When he climbed down, their eyes met, and something passed between them that words could not name. It was not sudden, not dramatic, simply the unspoken recognition of two lives brushing against each other in ways they had not expected. Evelyn felt her heart stir, fragile yet undeniable. She turned toward the shelves, searching for distraction, and her fingers rested on a book she had once read aloud with her husband. The memory no longer hurt as sharply. Instead, it felt softened, as though time had finally begun to mend its jagged edges. Noah noticed the book in her hands. "A favorite?" he asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "It used to be." He nodded, his gaze gentle. "Then maybe it can be again." The words stayed with her long after he left the room. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in her chamber, the book open before her, realizing that her heart, so long silenced, was beginning to whisper once more. Summer drifted into full bloom, and with it came a moment that tested the fragile bond forming between Evelyn and Noah. One morning, she overheard a pair of old acquaintances whispering on the veranda during a rare visit. They had come under the pretense of checking on her, but their words carried sharp edges. "Imagine," one said with a smirk, "the great Evelyn Whitmore lowering herself to spend her days with a handyman." "She must be lonely beyond reason," the other added, their voices dripping with pity disguised as concern. Evelyn froze in the hallway, her heart tightening. The truth of their observations stung, not because of Noah, but because it revealed how her world still judged her through the lens of status and wealth. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Would opening her life to him mean surrendering her dignity in the eyes of others? Later that day, she found Noah in the workshop by the stables, sanding a piece of oak. The steady rhythm of his work was grounding, and yet she felt the unease pressing against her chest. He glanced up, immediately noticing the storm in her eyes. "Something's troubling you," he said simply. She hesitated, then admitted, "People will talk." Noah set down his tools, wiping his hands slowly. "People always talk, but their words don't fix broken wood, or bring gardens back to life, or make a house feel like home again, and they certainly don't decide what makes a heart whole." The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. Evelyn realized that trust was not about silencing gossip, but about choosing whose voice mattered, and in that moment, it was clear. His steadiness weighed more than all the shallow judgments of society. She smiled faintly, the burden lifting. For the first time, she felt brave enough to care less about appearances and more about the truth of what was growing between them. The garden, once overrun with weeds and shadows, had become a place of renewal. Roses now climbed along the trellis, their colors vivid against the stone walls, and the fountain sang again with clear water. Evelyn often found herself wandering there in the evenings, breathing in the fragrance of blossoms that seemed to mirror her own slow return to life. One late afternoon, she discovered Noah among the rose bushes, kneeling as he adjusted the soil around newly planted lilies. The light of the setting sun painted everything in soft gold, and for a moment she simply watched, her heart swelling with something she could no longer ignore. He looked up, brushing dirt from his hands, and their eyes met across the garden. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, as though the air itself carried a secret between them. Gathering courage, she stepped closer. "This place feels alive again," she whispered. Noah gave a small smile. It's amazing what care can bring back. Her voice trembled as she asked, "And what about people? Do you believe they can bloom again after loss?" His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "Yes," he said, "if they allow themselves the chance." The words unlocked something inside her. Evelyn felt her heart spill forward, no longer able to hide. "I never expected this," she admitted softly, "to find myself feeling again. For you." A silence lingered, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Noah stood, wiping his palms against his jeans before stepping closer. He didn't rush, didn't overwhelm. Instead, he looked at her with a kind of quiet reverence, as though she were more than a widow, more than wealth, simply a woman rediscovering her heart. "I've felt it too," he confessed, his voice low but certain. In that moment, among roses and fading sunlight, Evelyn realized that love was not bound to the past. It could be reborn, tender and resilient, just like the garden they had brought back to life together. The mansion no longer felt like a relic of loss. Its halls carried warmth, its windows shone with light, and its gardens whispered of renewal. Evelyn walked through it one final time, as a widow defined by absence, and for the first time she felt the stirrings of a new identity, a woman capable of loving again. In the grand foyer, where dust once gathered and silence pressed heavily, Noah stood with his toolbox set aside. He was not dressed for work today. His shirt was clean, his hands free of calluses for once, as though even he understood that the moment was not about tasks or repairs, but about what they had quietly built between them. Evelyn approached, her steps echoing softly against the marble. Their eyes met, and there was no hesitation this time. She smiled, not the polite smile she'd worn for years, but one that rose from the deepest part of her, unguarded and true. "I never imagined," she said softly, "that opening my doors to a handyman would mean opening my heart as well." Noah's lips curved into a quiet smile. "Sometimes what's unexpected is exactly what we need." The house seemed to breathe with them, no longer heavy with memories, but alive with promise. In the doorway, framed by sunlight, they stood side by side, not as mistress and worker, not as widow and stranger, but as two souls who had found each other where they least expected. The chandeliers glimmered above them, and the garden's fragrance drifted through the open doors. Evelyn realized that love, like a home, was not about perfection. It was about care, resilience, and the courage to begin again. And so, the mansion no longer stood as a monument to grief, but as a living testament to healing and to the love that had grown quietly, like roses through stone.